Hey guys, in this video we are going to go over page 28, domain and range interval notation. So go ahead and add page 28 to your table of contents and I'll give you the paper to tape down. Okay, so to find the domain, we're going to scan our pencil from left to right along the x-axis. So we're going to start all the way to the left side of the graph, all the way to the right side of the graph, and then we'll write our domain. So I'm going to use a green highlighter for the domain. So here's my left side of the graph. Here's my right side of the graph. So notice that all the way to the left we start on an arrow, which means x is the lowest number that it could possibly be, which is negative infinity. And then the right arrow is on an arrow. It's pointing to positive infinity. So our domain is from positive infinity to negative infinity, and we use parentheses whenever we write the domain. So then the range, we scan our pencil from the bottom of the graph to the top of the graph along the y-axis. So we're going from the bottom to the top, which is the y values. So for the y values, I'm going to use red. So my range, we go from the bottom of the graph, which here's the bottom of my graph, up to the top of the graph, which seems to land right here on that arrow. That's as far up as I can possibly go and still touch the graph. So since my bottom number is down here at -2, that's where my graph starts. And then the other red is on the top arrow, means it points up forever, so to positive infinity. So with that -2, we're going to use a bracket, and with the infinity, we're going to use a parenthesis. So anytime we have a closed circle or a number, we're going to use the bracket. Anytime we have an arrow, we're going to use a parenthesis. So we're going to go through some of the examples. We're going to do the domain first. So we're going to go from left to right. So here's my leftmost point. Here's my rightmost point. So I need to count those numbers. So it goes over to -3 and over to +3. So I use -3 and +3 as my two numbers. Since they're both right on the graphs and their numbers, we're going to use a bracket because it includes -3 and 3. Now we're going to look at the range. So we go from the bottom of the graph to the top of the graph. So it looks like it goes all the way down to the bottom number of -3 and all the way up to the top number of +3. So our range is actually the same as our domain, from -3 to +3. And we use the brackets because it's right on the graph, solid point. All right, let's look at number 3. So we have the domain. So we go from left to right, both being on an arrow. So my domain is from -infinity because the left arrow goes on forever, and positive infinity because the right arrow goes on forever. Make sure we use parentheses there. Range, so we go from the bottom of the graph, which seems to be right here, to the top of the graph, which seems to be right here. And guess what? Since both of them land on infinity, our arrows are going forever, so it goes from the bottom -infinity to the top of positive infinity. That's our range. We'll do the domain of this one. So we go from left to right. Here's the left farthest point, the right farthest point. Both end up being on arrows. So the left arrow is -infinity, the right arrow is positive infinity. It goes to the left and to the right forever and doesn't stop. That's why we use infinity. And then the range, we go from the bottom, which that's on an arrow, to the top, which is a point on our graph. So our bottom arrow, since they're pointing down forever towards negative infinity, and then the highest point on that graph seems to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And since that is a point right on the graph, we're going to use the bracket for the 4. All right, next example, number 5. We go from left to right to find our domain. So it looks like this point is -1, this point is positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have -1 and positive 5 as our domain. And our range goes from the bottom to the top. So our bottom is -3, our top is +3. We're going to use a bracket for both. All right, number 6, the domain. So we go from left to right. Left to right, we end up on arrows, meaning we have negative infinity and positive infinity. Both get parentheses. Then we do the range, which is bottom to the top. Notice bottom is an arrow, top is an arrow, meaning the domain and range are actually both infinite. Because the arrows means it goes on forever. All right, just a couple more examples in this video, guys. So domain, we have left to right. So again, both landing on arrows, negative infinity to positive infinity with parentheses. And then we go from bottom, which is the arrow, to the top, which is the arrow. So our domain and range are both the same. Whenever we have the double arrows, our domain and range are infinite. All right, domain from left to right, and it seems to be going forever on to the right. And then we have from the bottom to the top, which are landing on both arrows again. So our domain is -1 to positive infinity, and our range goes down forever and up forever. So negative infinity to positive infinity. Anytime we use an infinity, we use a parenthesis. Anytime we have a number that's a solid point on our graph, we use a bracket. All right, from left to right. Well, from left to right, we just have one single number, so the domain in this case is actually x equals 2. This one's a little bit different. And then we go from the bottom to the top. Well, the bottom is negative infinity. The top is positive infinity because of the 2 arrows. So the domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. And then we've got from left to right for number 10. Here's left, here's right, both on arrows. So our domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. And then from bottom to top, notice that this is the bottom and the top. So this one's a little bit different too. Y seems to equal -1, 2, 3, 4. Y equals -4. So number 9 and 10 had slightly different domains and ranges because they were a vertical and a horizontal line. So go ahead and pause the video and make up any of the questions that you need to make up. Go ahead and grab a couple highlighters, make the same highlights that I did, and then whenever you're ready, I'll give you the assignment that goes with page 28.